Guess the cartel forgot who they were dealing with. Min-Jun Park's words never needed to be loud, but his presence carried the weight of a man who had survived wars, built a life from nothing, and protected his land like it was sacred. The cartel saw him as just another rancher outside El Paso, Texas. A man too proud, too stubborn, too foolish to bend to their threats. That night, their trucks returned, filled with fire and rifles, setting the Park Ranch ablaze, flames climbing like they wanted to devour every memory, every stone, every dream. They thought destroying his home would destroy him. They couldn't have been more wrong. By dawn, Min-Jun would ride into the heart of danger, not alone, but with 18 trained assassins ready to reclaim what was his. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Min-Jun Park had always been a man of quiet discipline. A Korean American who had seen more hardship than most could imagine. He carried scars, not just on his body, but in his mind. Years in conflicts abroad had taught him survival, patience, and the cost of trust. But here, on this sprawling stretch of land outside El Paso, Texas, he had built something real, something lasting, a ranch that had belonged to his family for generations, its fences worn but strong, its barns filled with memories and sweat and quiet victories. Every corner of the property told a story of long summer mornings, tending livestock with his father, evenings watching the desert sky turn gold, winter nights filled with the warmth of his family's laughter. The ranch wasn't just a home, it was a symbol, proof that a man could rise from nothing and hold on to what truly mattered. And yet, even paradise had its predators. Across town, Rafaelon's cartel men were already planning. They thrived on arrogance, brutality, and greed. Every whispered deal, every crooked handshake, strengthened their sense of invincibility. To them, Min-Jun was just another obstacle, a man standing too tall, refusing to bow. A man whose family name and land had value they intended to claim by fire if necessary. Min-Jun knew the dangers. Even before the first threat arrived at his door, corruption ran deep. Powerful friends in city offices, the local sheriff's occasional too-friendly advice, they were reminders that enemies wore suits and badges as easily as masks and guns. Every move he made had to be measured, precise, cautious. One wrong step, and decades of work, decades of family legacy could vanish in smoke. But what they didn't know, what no one outside a very small circle could guess, was that loyalty and debts owed ran deep too. Friends who owed him their lives. Soldiers who had survived alongside him, guided by promises made in the heat of combat. And though the cartel had no idea, the storm they were about to ignite would awaken forces far more formidable than fire and rifles. Every morning, Min-Jun walked the ranch, checking fences, inspecting feed, his eyes tracing the horizon as though reading the future in the hills and dust. Every sound mattered, the distant howl of a coyote, the clatter of a loose gate, even the faint hum of a truck engine miles away. His instincts, honed from years of surviving the impossible, never rested. He could feel it, the tension hanging in the air. Something was coming, something that would test not just his strength, but the strength of everyone who had ever trusted him. And when the first shadow fell across the eastern rise, Min-Jun would be ready. Because for every threat, every greedy hand, every act of violence, there was a reckoning waiting. The midday heat pressed down on El Paso, baking the dusty road that led to Min-Jun's ranch. The horizon shimmered with the distant hum of approaching engines. Min-Jun had seen it before, the way men moved when they believed they owned the world. Today, those men wore the cartel's insignia, their trucks lined like predators circling their prey. Rafaelon stepped out first, a smirk cutting across his sun-beaten face. "We're here to make things simple," he said, his voice smooth, but dripping arrogance. "Hand over the land, and maybe we leave a few buildings standing." Min-Jun didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. He had faced threats before, threats that tried to break men faster than fire. He looked at Raphaelon and his men, calm, measured, almost serene. "It never will be." A laugh rolled across the trucks. "You think a man like you can stand against us? Against me?" Raphaelon's tone was sharp, mocking, dismissive. "You're a relic, Park. A ghost clinging to dirt that isn't yours to keep. Step aside." Min-Jun's jaw tightened. He had no illusions about the consequences. But he also had no fear. "I've built this life with my own hands, with blood, sweat, and the memory of those who trusted me. You can try to take it, but you will find I am not so easily erased." The cartel men shifted, tightening their grips on rifles. One of them spat into the dust. "Talk is cheap. Tonight, we decide who survives." Min-Jun felt a familiar weight in his chest, the surge of anticipation, the cold clarity of strategy. He thought the confrontation might end peacefully. A warning. A line drawn in words rather than bullets. But the arrogance in Raphaelon's eyes made it clear. Mercy was a concept they didn't understand. And in that moment, Min-Jun knew the calm before the storm had ended. The fire that would consume his home, his life, was already flickering in the shadows. And he would not face it unarmed, not unprepared. Every muscle, every memory, every lesson from the past whispered the same truth. This was only the beginning. The first crackle of fire sounded like a whip across the quiet El Paso night. Min-Jun had just stepped inside the barn when the cartel struck. Gasoline hissed as it met dry wood. Flames licked the edges of haystacks, and the smell of smoke burned in his lungs before he even understood what was happening. Outside, the trucks roared, engines growling like beasts. Men with torches and rifles moved with precision, as if the destruction was a choreographed ritual. Min-Jun's heart sank as he watched the first sparks climb the main house. His family's portraits, heirlooms passed down from his grandfather, delicate trinkets he had kept from the war years, all threatened by the ravenous flames. He ran, yanking his daughter from the doorway, shielding her from the heat as the air shimmered with orange and red. His wife clutched their youngest, her face pale but determined, eyes wide with disbelief. He could hear the animals screaming in the pens, the horses banging against the wooden walls, the chickens scattering into the night, wings flapping like desperate prayers. Every second was a cacophony of destruction. The crack of burning timber, the hiss of fire licking oil-soaked wood, the distant taunt of cartel men laughing at the chaos they orchestrated. Min-Jun moved from room to room, grabbing what he could. A few letters, a small silver knife, a reminder of his father's resilience. Every object was a memory, a lifetime condensed into fragile shapes. The barn collapsed with a deafening crash just as he managed to pull out the last trapped animal. Sweat and soot streaked his face. His fingers blistered from heat, yet he kept moving, pushing through exhaustion and panic. The night felt endless, the flames stretching taller, hungrier, consuming everything he had built. And then, in one cruel instant, the main house's roof gave way, sending sparks and embers into the desert wind. Min-Jun stumbled, his knee catching on debris, scraping blood onto the scorched dirt. He looked back at the inferno that had been his sanctuary, his family's legacy. It was gone. But he was alive. His family was alive. And somewhere deep inside, a cold clarity settled over him, sharper than the pain in his chest. The men who had done this would pay. They didn't understand who they had awakened. They didn't know. Min-Jun Park. He sank to the ground for a moment, hands trembling, chest heaving, as the heat of the fire pressed into his bones. He watched the flames consume the last of his memories, and in that moment, the world seemed to tilt. And then, quietly, he whispered to himself, "They'll regret this. They will all regret this." Before we move further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The first light of dawn cast a gray pall over the scorched remains of the ranch. Smoke spiraled lazily into the sky, curling like ghostly fingers over the blackened earth. Min-Jun Park knelt in the ashes, his hands trembling as he sifted through the remains of what had once been his home. The familiar scent of cedar and leather was replaced by acrid smoke, a bitter reminder that nothing would ever be the same. He could hear the faint crackle of dying embers, but there was no other sound, no laughter, no voices, only the wind whispering across the ruined fields. His eyes traced the charred frame of the barn where his father had taught him to ride, where his children had played under the summer sun. Each broken beam, every blackened plank, told the story of a life reduced to ash in a single, cruel night. Min-Jun's chest ached, not just from physical exhaustion, but from a profound grief that seemed to reach into his very bones. He touched a scorched photograph of his parents, their smiles frozen in time, and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This was more than a home. This was a legacy, his life's work, and it had been taken. But beneath the pain, beneath the grief, there was a quiet, unyielding fire. A determination that the destruction would not be the end, that someone would answer the call he was about to make. He stood, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the horizon where the first hints of sunlight broke through smoke. He could feel it in his gut. The reckoning had only just begun. Every step he took across the scorched earth echoed with memory the laughter of his children, the scent of fresh-cut hay, the quiet mornings sipping coffee on the porch. And in that silence, a promise whispered to him almost audibly, "They will pay. They will all pay." But he wasn't finished yet. Somewhere, waiting beyond the horizon, the men who owed him a debt were stirring, ready to move. And soon, the world would witness the force that one man could summon when pushed past the point of survival. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Min-Jun Park sat alone on the scorched porch, the bitter scent of smoke still clinging to his clothes and hair. His hands, blackened from sifting through the ashes, trembled slightly as he reached for the old rotary phone, its cord twisted and worn, a relic from another life. He stared at it for a long moment, letting the silence stretch, letting the memory of what had been stolen sink deeper into his bones. Then, with a slow, deliberate exhale, he dialed. Every number pressed was a heartbeat echoing across time and distance, a reminder of promises made and debts owed. Somewhere, beyond the city limits of Los Angeles, men who had once walked through fire by his side were listening. Min-Jun didn't speak more than a word or two, but it was enough. A single sentence carried with it the weight of vengeance, of justice, of a reckoning that could not be ignored. By the end of the call, a quiet tension filled the air. The kind that made the wind seem heavier, the shadows longer, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Somewhere, out of sight, 18 trained men stirred. Soldiers who had owed him more than just gratitude. Men who had trained in the harshest conditions, honed every skill to deadly perfection. And who knew Min-Jun's resolve better than anyone alive? They were coming. He hung up the phone and stood, the first faint light of dawn painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of gray and gold. His jaw tightened. His eyes, once reflecting grief, now burned with determination. By morning, they would be ready. By morning, nothing would stand in the way of the justice he demanded. If this part is making sense, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's really watching to this point. And remember, this is only the beginning. The storm was about to break. By the first light of dawn, Min-Jun's phone had done its work. Across the country, 18 men stirred from sleep, each one carrying memories, scars, and a loyalty that could not be bought or broken. They were men shaped by discipline and danger. Former Navy SEALs, special ops veterans, and a few whose lives had intersected with Min-Jun's in moments of life and death. Each answered the call with no hesitation, no questions, only a silent acknowledgement that the time had come. The first to arrive was Kim Tae-hyun, a sharpshooter whose calm hands had saved lives in desert firefights. He carried his rifle like an extension of himself, every movement precise, measured, lethal. Next was Jae-hoon Choi, the strategist, who could read terrain, weather, and enemy patterns as if they were lines in a book. There was also Min-Jun Park, explosives expert, quiet, reserved, yet terrifying, In his capability, every fuse, every charge, meticulously calculated. One by one, they converged at the outskirts of Los Angeles, driving down narrow highways, through empty backroads, unseen, like shadows slipping across a sleeping city. Back at the burned ranch, Min-Jun walked among the ruins, scanning the horizon with the patience of a predator. When he saw the first car emerge from the desert haze, headlights dimmed against the morning sun, a spark of hope ignited. One by one, they arrived. No words were spoken. None were needed. Each man's eyes met his own. A silent conversation of trust, of respect, of a bond forged in blood and fire. They checked their weapons with meticulous care. Rifles polished, silencers fitted, magazines loaded, knives strapped. Surveillance drones lifted silently into the air, scanning the cartel's territory from angles unseen. Maps were spread across the hoods of trucks. Satellite images were studied, escape routes memorized, contingencies planned. Tae-hyun's fingers traced lines on the paper like a composer guiding a symphony, every move choreographed to perfection. There was Min-Jun himself, standing at the center, calm, his presence anchoring them. He did not boast, did not shout orders. He was the reason they were here, the reason they would act as one. And yet, in his quiet gaze, each man felt the weight of what was at stake. This was personal. This was justice. And every second mattered. Small challenges emerged, even in preparation. A faulty drone motor threatened to delay reconnaissance. One of the vehicles stalled in the sand, wheels spinning uselessly. But each obstacle was overcome with a mix of skill and improvisation, tiny victories that built confidence and momentum. Tae-hyun adjusted the drone. Choi recalculated the approach. Min-Soo rigged the vehicle with a careful workaround. Each problem solved was another testament to their precision, their focus, their readiness to strike. The camaraderie was unspoken but palpable. A nod, a glance, a slight smirk at a small joke whispered in the tense air. They had faced life and death together, and that bond carried more weight than any weapon. Every man knew his role. Every man trusted the others with his life. The air was thick with anticipation, every heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of what was to come. Min-Jun moved among them once more, quietly checking, quietly observing. He noted their focus, their skill, their silent commitment. He allowed himself a brief moment to remember the home they were about to avenge. The smoke, the screams, the ashes, and then he shut that memory away. There was no room for hesitation, only action. As the sun climbed higher, the team readied their final gear. Maps folded, drones tucked away, weapons secured. They were shadows now, invisible yet unstoppable. Every detail had been accounted for. Yet the uncertainty of the mission loomed. The cartel was ruthless, unpredictable, and dangerous. The tension was nearly unbearable, but it sharpened their senses, honed their reflexes, tightened their bond. And then, as Min-Jun gave the faintest nod, the signal that the time had come, the men fell into formation. Silent, precise, and deadly. They moved toward the roads leading south. Every mile, every turn, every shadow could hide a threat, but the team advanced with unwavering confidence. They were a storm waiting to break. By the time the city skyline was just a silhouette on the horizon, the team was ready. Every man knew the stakes. Every man knew the plan. And every man knew that once they crossed the line, nothing would ever be the same. Small questions lingered, unspoken. Would the cartel see them coming? Could any mistake undo the meticulous preparation? What would await them when they arrived? The answers were hidden in the hours ahead, in the streets, in the compound where the enemy thought they were safe. But one thing was certain. Min-Jun and his 18 allies were coming, and they would not fail. The convoy moved with silent precision. Dust rose like a ghostly fog along the desert roads outside Los Angeles. Each vehicle a shadow gliding over scorched earth. Their engines muffled, headlights dimmed to near invisibility. Min-Jun rode at the lead, eyes scanning the horizon, muscles tense, senses alert. Behind him, the 18 men spread out in formation, every step measured, every breath controlled, every glance sharp. They were not just moving toward the cartel's compound. They were entering a world where a single misstep could cost lives. Drones hummed above, invisible to anyone who might be watching from below. The cameras transmitted a live feed to Min-Jun and Choi, who analyzed each angle, each perimeter, each possible line of sight. Gates, guards, patrols, they noted every pattern, every routine, every weakness. The team spoke in gestures, silent commands, subtle nods, a language developed through years of training and trust. There was no room for error. There never was. As they advanced, Min-Jun's mind drifted briefly to the past, to the promises that had brought these men here. He remembered the war zones where they had bled side by side, the nights spent under fire, the debts of honor that could never be repaid in words alone. He remembered the faces of the men who had once saved his life, and he knew that today those debts would be repaid in a single, calculated storm of retribution. A flicker of a smile passed across his face, grim, determined. Each man in the convoy had a story etched in scars and discipline. Tae-hyun, the sharpshooter, recalled a firefight where he had held a ridge against impossible odds, alone for hours, counting only on instinct and precision. Min-Soo, the explosives expert, remembered a night when a single miscalculation would have cost him his life and those of his squad mates. Jae-hoon, the strategist, visualized the battlefield before it unfolded, seeing possibilities no one else could comprehend. That battlefield was a sprawling cartel compound, heavily fortified, underestimating the storm that approached. The terrain grew harsher as they drew closer. Rocky hills, sparse vegetation, and open stretches offered no cover, and every shadow could conceal a gun barrel. Every bend in the road, a trap. The sun dipped low, stretching long shadows across the desert floor, and the air shimmered with heat, dust, and the weight of anticipation. "Stay sharp," Min-Jun whispered under his breath, as if speaking aloud might summon attention. Every man flinched at the slightest noise, a distant bark, a gust of wind, the faintest echo of movement. Flashbacks flickered through Min-Jun's memory. He remembered the first time the cartel had threatened him, their arrogance, their cruelty, and how he had vowed silently that he would never bow. He remembered the night his ranch had burned, the smell of smoke that would haunt him forever, the cries of animals, the echoes of fire consuming the life he had built. And now, with his allies by his side, he would ensure that those who destroyed his home understood the consequences of underestimating him. The final approach to the cartel compound was a calculated ballet of shadows. Vehicles stopped, engines cut, and the team dispersed on foot, moving along natural cover, blending into the terrain as though the desert itself had swallowed them. Min-Jun led the way, scanning each wall, each gate, each guard. The SEALs communicated in silent signals, their movements precise, rehearsed, lethal. What awaited them behind the cartel's walls? Min-Jun asked himself, though he already suspected the answer. Chaos, resistance, and the desperate arrogance of men who had never faced anyone like this. And yet, even as they moved, a shadow of doubt lingered. Not everyone who arrived would make it out alive. Every decision carried weight. Every wrong step could unravel the careful plan. Min-Jun's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with focus. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the lives in his hands, the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Each man in the team mirrored his intensity, every nerve primed for action, every thought tuned to the single goal: justice, vengeance, and the reclamation of what had been stolen. Min-Jun paused briefly behind a jagged outcrop of rock, surveying the compound through the lens of the drone feed. Guards patrolled methodically, unaware that the storm was already in motion, that 18 trained men were watching every move, calculating every response. He felt the surge of adrenaline, that familiar rush that came only before the moments that defined a life. This was more than a mission. This was the culmination of everything he had survived. Every scar, every promise, every lesson learned in fire and blood. He glanced back at his men, each one poised, calm, ready. And he whispered, almost to himself, "Tonight, they will learn what happens when you cross the wrong man." The desert held its breath with them, the wind still, the sun fading, and the first hints of night stretching shadows long across the terrain. Every second now was precious, every movement measured. The compound waited, unaware, unprepared. And Min-Jun Park and his team would be the reckoning they had never seen coming. The night was thick with tension, the desert silence punctuated only by the faint hum of drones and the crunch of boots on gravel. Min-Jun Park led his team through the shadows, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. The compound loomed ahead, walls high, lights flickering, guards moving with the arrogance of men who believed themselves untouchable. But they hadn't accounted for the storm that was about to descend upon them. Min-Jun's eyes narrowed as he observed the compound. Each guard was a puzzle piece in the nightmarish mosaic of corruption and cruelty he had come to dismantle. He thought of the ranch, now reduced to ash, the memories of family dinners, birthday celebrations, the quiet strength of his parents. All stolen in one night of fire and greed. He remembered the promises he had made, the debts owed to those who had once saved him, and he knew that tonight every wrong would be made right. He signaled, and the team spread out with mechanical precision. Taehyun moved to the eastern wall, rifle steady, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Jae-hoon disabled the electronic gates silently, wires bending to his will as if they too understood the necessity of this moment. Min-soo carried packs of meticulously prepared explosives, the weight of his hands balanced with years of training and experience. They were more than a team, they were an extension of Min-Jun's will, a living embodiment of loyalty, honor, and vengeance. As they breached the outer perimeter, the first confrontations unfolded. Guards saw shadows, felt presences, but could not comprehend the precision, the discipline, the inevitability of what was happening. A cartel's enforcer ran, a pistol in hand, and Taehyun's bullet found its mark with surgical accuracy. A thug lunged blindly, only to be incapacitated silently, efficiently, leaving no room for error, no mercy for cruelty. The cartel's arrogance began to crumble under the weight of Min-Jun's calculated fury. Inside the compound, Min-Jun confronted Raphaelon, the man who had destroyed everything. He stood tall, the desert wind catching the edges of his jacket, eyes cold, voice quiet but sharp. "Did you think this would break me?" he asked, each word carrying the calm certainty of a man who had survived everything. Raphaelon laughed, but it was hollow, brittle, a sound swallowed by the desert night. "You're just one man," he sneered, "and your friends nothing but shadows." Min-Jun didn't respond with words. Instead, the shadows themselves seemed to rise, the 18 allies he had called now emerging from every corner, every blind spot, surrounding the compound with lethal precision. The element of surprise was absolute. Every man in the cartel realized too late that they were outmatched, outnumbered, and outsmarted. Panic rippled through them, arrogance evaporating like smoke in the wind. The violence unfolded with cinematic clarity. Explosions shattered walls, the scent of burning timber mixing with gunpowder. Min-Jun moved through the chaos like a ghost, ensuring the safety of innocents while delivering swift justice to those who had caused irreparable harm. Each action was deliberate, each strike a poetic balance between justice and vengeance. Raphaelon attempted escape, but Min-Jun's team was already closing in. The man who had thought himself untouchable now trembled, humiliated, and broken under the weight of the reckoning he had brought upon himself. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was space for reflection. Min-Jun paused, looking at the compound now reduced to rubble. The men who had terrorized his life stripped of power, their secrets exposed, their arrogance extinguished. He thought of the ranch, the memories, the people who had believed in him, and felt the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. Loyalty had been honored, debts repaid, and the men who had once saved him now stood beside him, witnessing the fruits of their shared history. As the dust settled and the first light of dawn brushed the desert horizon, Min-Jun looked out across the scorched compound, the silence replacing the earlier chaos. He knew the moral weight of what had been done. Justice had been served, but it came at a cost. The enemy humiliated, the innocent avenged, yet questions lingered in the air like the last tendrils of smoke. Was justice truly served? Or was this merely one chapter in a far longer story? A story of loyalty, vengeance, and the consequences of crossing a man who would never bow? Min-Jun's gaze softened as he thought of the future, of rebuilding, of the quiet life he had always fought for. Yet beneath the calm, the desert whispered a truth he understood well. There would always be those who sought to test boundaries, to take what did not belong to them. And for them, he and his allies would be waiting ready, disciplined, and unyielding. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. As the first light of morning crept over the horizon, Min-Jun Park stood silently, the desert stretching endlessly before him. Scorched, yet still standing. Much like his spirit, the weight of the night's events settled over him, but it was not crushing, it was grounding. He had faced the unthinkable, defended what he loved, and honored the bonds of loyalty that had carried him through life. His family's legacy, once threatened, now felt protected, and the echoes of courage resonated in every step he took across the ash-strewn land. He thought of the men who had stood beside him, shadows in the night transformed into guardians, their debts repaid, their loyalty unshakable. He thought of justice, hard-earned and yet fragile, knowing that it could be challenged again, but for now, the right had triumphed over the cruel, and the righteous had prevailed. And in that quiet victory, there was hope not just for him, but for anyone who had ever felt powerless against forces bigger than themselves. Because sometimes, true strength isn't measured in fire or violence, but in the courage to rise after everything has been taken, in the loyalty that binds friends and allies, and in the quiet determination to protect what matters most. Min-Jun had reminded the world and perhaps himself that even in the darkest nights, there is a dawn worth fighting for. If this story hit you like it did us, hit that like button, it helps us reach more people. And subscribe if you want more gripping stories every week.